Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Mindfulness for Beginners. I hope you're happy. I hope you're peaceful. It's a pleasure to practice with you again. If you're enjoying the podcast, then you might think of someone that you know that a particular episode is relevant to. You might share that with them. And I think today's episode might fall into that category. This is an extended version of the podcast. It's a conversation with my friend Sheen. We met a couple of years ago through establishing a Sangha mindfulness group with a few other people, and I've really valued our friendship since then. She's been practicing for 16 years. She's a qualified teacher, and I have to say I've learned a huge amount from her. She delivers courses. She is a public speaker at conferences. And she's a really powerful advocate for mindfulness and existing in the present moment. And I would really recommend having a look at her website, the app that we discuss during the conversation, and her online course. And I really wanted to get Katie on for a while, actually, not just because, she's a great person to have a conversation with, but also my podcast tends to concentrate on anxiety, sadness, and other ways that mindfulness can address poor mental health. And mindfulness can also be used for addressing physical pain as well. And this is something that Katie has a lot to share about. So the podcast talks about how to use mindfulness and the principles of mindfulness to address chronic pain, and also her perspectives on the current COVID-19 crisis as well, which is well worth listening to. So I started off by asking Katie how she first got into mindfulness.
Yeah, so I first discovered it through a book. It was about 17 years ago, something like that. So it was a book about Zen Buddhism, because in those days, nobody really talked about the word mindfulness particularly. It's part of the Eightfold Path, but it was Buddhist books rather than mindfulness books that I was reading at that stage. But the problem with discovering it through books is that the subtleties are missed. So I then went on my first Buddhist retreat a couple of years later, and then practiced in various different Buddhist traditions, and then found the Plum Village tradition, which is the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, probably about 7 years ago, something like that. And since then I've been settled in that particular tradition, and that's much more of what I would call a mindfulness tradition. It's still Buddhist, but it's much less of a religion than any other form of Buddhism that I've studied in.
How were you introduced to the Plum Village practice?
It was a couple of things. One, I had originally discovered mindfulness, as I said, through a Zen book. So I was looking on the internet for Zen traditions. But actually, the connection was made because a friend of mine had mentioned the group a couple of years before and said, "Why don't you come?" But it was on a Sunday night. And at the time, I'd recently got divorced, and Sunday night was just the worst time. I couldn't, because the children came back on a Sunday night, having been with their father for the weekend. So it just didn't fit in with my schedule. So once the children left home, then I went on the internet, found the group, and suddenly thought, oh, hang on a minute, this is the one that Jan mentioned. And it kind of made that connection. So I did already know somebody in the group as well.
Yeah, that seems to be such a common thing, because that's how I got into it as well, because it was through a friend of mine who was going along to a London Sangha, and it seems it's very much it's not to criticize Plum Village's, social media presence or anything, but the vast majority of people, it's kind of a person-to-person thing, because it's through kind of relating your personal experience of the benefits of practicing mindfulness generally, or a specific method of it that really gets people interested in it, and that's how it's been in kind of me talking to other people as well. Not that you're deliberately recruiting people, because it's not really that kind of thing.
No,
But
definitely not.
when it kind of comes up in conversations, and then people who are at that point in their life where they're receptive to it, then
Yeah.
tend to ask a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. And that's actually how I ended up teaching mindfulness. So I was already lecturing in colleges and universities, so I'm a qualified teacher. And it was my students, I was teaching nutrition at the time, and it was my students that said, why are you always so calm and, you're really even, you never ever coming in a mood and all of those kind of things. And so I said, well, it's probably the mindfulness that I do. I find that really helps me to manage my anxiety in particular, which is my kind of thing, my habit energy that brings me most suffering. And it was through that, and then I developed. It's when I was teaching at University of Worcester on the master's degree, nutritional therapy. I developed a lecture about motivating client change around food, and was talking about mindful eating. And from there on in, it was students there, and then at the College of Naturopathic Medicine in Manchester, that they started to say, "Will you come and teach about this instead?" And in fact, my first time I really stepped out and did that was at the Institute for Optimum Nutrition in London, a full day for practitioners on mindful eating. And I remember it so clearly because mindfulness was something so personal for me. I never intended to share it or teach it, and to make that change from teaching nutrition, which is sort of biochemistry basically, which is obviously not personal at all, you're just presenting facts, and then to share something that felt so personal. Oh my goodness, I was so nervous. And that's been a really interesting progression for me as a teacher, is to move from teaching facts that you're really interested in, obviously, and find fascinating, to something that is much more personal, a lot
Mm,
more about teaching from the heart. And that I still find it still gets me nervous at times to kind of share something, so I teach it because, just like you were saying, is that it's really, really changed things for me. There are so many times in life where I've just thought, I just don't know how I would cope without the mindfulness teachings. And that's why I share it with people. And it is, as you say, it feels like sort of networking. Somebody is going through a really difficult time, and I can relate to it and think, well, when I was feeling like that, this is what helped me, and it happened to be a mindfulness practice. And of course, mindfulness isn't religion or anything like that. You're not trying to recruit people or anything. That's one of the things I like about it. It fits alongside anybody's beliefs. You don't have to believe anything to practice mindfulness. And that experiential side, I think, is really important. I like the fact that you're not expected to be told something and believe it. You're given something to experiment with. Here's a meditation. Why don't you try this and see what it does for you? And the number of times that I've thought, well, this seems a bit weird, frankly, and then I've given it a go and thought, well, I'm glad I'm on my own because this is a bit sort of embarrassing, but it's really worked. So, I guess I can give you an example of that, is because that sounds a bit odd out of context, but there's one practice within the Plum Village tradition which is about smiling to yourself, smiling to your body. And I had cancer in 2015. In fact, we're recording this in April 2020. And this time 5 years ago, I was in the midst of 28 sessions of radiotherapy and 2 rounds of chemotherapy. And the chemotherapy was through a PICC line, which is, so you have this line going into you and a bag of chemotherapy attached to you for 6 days. So it's pretty hard to sleep because you've got this thing going into your body with the chemo in. And the radiotherapy caused really, really severe skin damage. So I had 13 days in a burns unit at Wythenshawe Hospital afterwards, and then really extreme pain for about a year afterwards. So it was a really, really, really tough journey. And as I was going through the recovery period, I discovered this. Well, I'd already come across it, but I hadn't used it so much, was this idea of smiling. And it's just, you start from the top of your head and you're like, oh, okay, I'm aware of my hair and smiling to my hair, which obviously raises a smile if your hair isn't looking very good or you haven't got very much hair. And then you smile at your forehead and your eyes and your ears and your nose, and then you work through including your internal organs. And smiling to where my skin damage was, smiling to where the cancer was, all of that kind of stuff was a really interesting experience, because at first I found it really difficult. It's just like, what do you mean smile at the bits of me where I have pain? And yet learning to move towards the pain with this, and the smiling is more about a kind of a kind, love is probably too strong a word, but this kind of friendly way of relating to your body. And honestly, it was just transformational. I
Mm.
can't say what a difference that made, because it didn't just reduce my pain, but it also helped my self-esteem, helped me to get a bit of a sense of humor about myself and about life. And it was amazing. And yet when somebody says to you, why don't you just smile to bits of your body, you're like, really?
Yeah.
You know, it's a bit weird, isn't it? But yeah, it
Yeah,
really worked.
the first time I went to a Plum Village practice,
Mm.
the bit that was like, this is really weird, and should I be here, was the walk-in meditation, where we were all walking around in a circle, and it
Yeah.
reminded me of that bit of is it Life of Brian, where the monks are walking around and hitting themselves in the head,
Yes. Yeah,
but so it did feel slightly strange, but then
definitely.
like a lot of parts of the practice, just as you say, it looks a bit weird, but then you do it and you kind of realize
Yeah,
what the purpose of it actually is and how it brings you into the present moment. But
totally.
I wanted to ask you about, it was one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about in this interview was how mindfulness can support through ill health.
Yeah.
And it isn't. I'm very fortunate that I haven't gone through a period of difficult physical health myself, and I was interested to find out more about if somebody might be listening to this who maybe has some chronic pain or has an ongoing disease that's difficult to deal with,
Mhm.
how mindfulness can help to support them to deal with the physical feelings that they're having.
Yeah, sure. So there's obviously the practice that I've just mentioned. And what that does is there's a really interesting concept in mindfulness, which is this idea of acceptance, is accepting the illness and
Mm,
accepting the pain. I mean, another way of thinking about that is allowing it, which is often how Tara Brach talks about it, is allowing the pain. And the other people who are fantastic on chronic pain are breathworks, who I'm just beginning to train with, and it's really interesting to see how Vijayamala Birch, who's the co-founder of Breathworks, talks about managing her chronic pain, because it really resonates, but they use slightly different wording from the wording that I was aware of at the time. So the traditional way that I was aware of when I was going through my cancer 5 years ago was this idea of not firing the second arrow,
mm,
which, and breathworks would talk about it in terms of the difference between primary and secondary suffering. So the first arrow, or your primary suffering, is your illness. So for me, that was obviously cancer. And combined with that was then the pain. And the firing the second arrow is all the stories that we spin ourselves around that. So for me, it was around, so I have cancer, but am I going to survive? How am I going to be left afterwards? What if this? What if that? What if the other? What if this pain lasts forever? What if I'm never the same again? And in other words, that's the firing the second arrow. The first thing is the actual primary thing that has happened to you. And realizing how often I fired that second arrow and being mindfully aware of when I was caught up in those thoughts and the catastrophizing and the worry. And Thich Nhat Hanh has this wonderful thing where he says on a postcard, write, "Are you sure?"
mm,
And I put one sentence before it. I was like, "Is it true? Are you sure?" And I had that on a postcard, and I had it on the fridge, and then I wrote it out a few more times and kind of propped it around the house, so that when I did become caught up in that kind of thinking, that idea of thinking, so are my thoughts actually true? Do I know that this is true? Or am I just being caught up in my fears? And just that stepping outside and thinking, actually, I don't know that this is true. allowed me to see more clearly what was real and what wasn't, and also therefore enabled me to ask for help. So, for example, if I was really worrying about something, so there was a certain, like the pain had got worse, or I was bleeding more heavily again, and I was worried that that meant that the cancer was coming back, I would think, okay, so you are really concerned about what this means, but you don't know, because you're the only person you know that's gone through this particular cancer journey. So why don't you phone your specialist nurse and ask her? And I would phone these wonderful nurses and just say, look, this is happening at the moment. And they would have the knowledge to say, that's normal. That's fine. That's how we do expect you to be at this stage. And we're really sorry because we wish you were feeling better. But actually, this is how bad it is at this stage. And you just have to get through this, and we're here to help you. And can we help you with pain relief? And just, talking to people that could put my mind at rest was important. But the first step was realizing that maybe my thoughts weren't true, and that maybe I needed to find out what was true and what wasn't. And actually, a more recent example of that was that, so I had these 28 sessions of pelvic radiotherapy, and one of the side effects is potential lifelong hip pain. And so a couple of years after the treatment, I started developing hip pain, and I was just like, I cannot believe this. I'm early 50s, the hip pain is starting now, and just so much fear about what the future would hold. And I really put off asking for help about it because I was so frightened of being told, yeah, actually, sorry, Kate, this is it now. And then eventually I did go to the doctors, and I got a referral to a physiotherapist who just said, oh, it's just because you haven't been able to exercise for a long time and your core muscles are really weak, and that's referred hip pain. And I just burst into tears, and she's like, oh my goodness, what have I said? And I just said, I just can't believe that I've just spent weeks and weeks and weeks thinking that this was a side effect of the treatment, which I'd been told to was a strong possibility. And actually it wasn't at all. And it was something that I could do something about. And, it's so hard to, I think, when you're caught up in these, really, really difficult periods of ill health and chronic ill health, especially when you know that things are going to progress, is to be able to see clearly what is real and what is not, and what is your fear. And that's a real gift that mindfulness can bring. And it definitely affects the amount of pain that you feel. Because if you've got pain and then you're frightened of the pain, your body tenses.
Yeah.
And of course, as soon as you're tense, the pain is worse. It's much more intense, and your mind is focused on the pain, and your nervous system actually becomes better and better at feeling the pain, because the first time you get a twinge of pain, you go, oh no, here it starts. And so your mind is searching for pain. So the whole thing becomes this dreadful, dreadful negative cycle, which doesn't mean it's all in your head at all. It means that your nervous system is responding to a real pain, but therefore making it worse. And to break that cycle is amazing, absolutely amazing. And in the end, I'd like to say I did it through a period of amazing enlightenment. It wasn't like that at all. I just one day, so every day it was always focused around, I need to get better. What can I do? What have I done wrong? Why is my pain worse? What could I do to make my pain less today? And was so focused on healing that one day I just thought, do you know what? This is just exhausting. I'm just going to take what pain I have now and get on with life. And my pain immediately dropped because I just stopped the struggle of trying to make it go away. And it was still there, but something in my mind switched to just say, this is enough now. I just can't do this anymore. I can't keep fighting it. And I just accept it. And that was the real turning point.
I think it's interesting that these kind of principles of mindfulness are being used in wider medicine, like acceptance therapy as well. And there was a real revolution for me whenever I started practicing. And I think it was a conversation that I had with somebody else in a Sangha, in a mindfulness group, where they talked about the second arrow. and it was an absolute revolution for me, a
Yeah.
mind-blowing revolution, and actually realizing, because for me it was around poor mental health. So I have quite a lot of anxiety. It's a lot better than it used to be,
Mm-hmm.
but realizing that whenever the anxiety starts, that's not necessarily, DEFCON 5, and it's kind of red alert time, because
Yeah.
that my reaction to my anxiety was feeding into it as well. And
Yeah.
now, so giving an example of a situation that's difficult for me is whenever I'm in a room full of people that I don't know, is just breathing and accepting the fact of where I am, and that I will be feeling anxious with it, and
Yeah.
being okay with that suddenly kind of means that actually I can do this now, and it's okay. It's
Mm.
the acceptance. It's the acceptance that it's there and exists
Yes.
seems to reduce it. It's the strangest thing.
It is. It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. And I had depression a long time ago, and for years afterwards, every time I started to feel a bit low, the panic would kick in of, oh my goodness, is my depression coming back? And it's taken an awfully long time to accept that it's normal to
Yeah,
feel sad, and it's normal to feel anxious, and it's normal to feel upset. And yeah, I really identify with your experiences around anxiety. And you know, because it's weird, I mean, I do loads and loads of public speaking and conferences and things like that, but for some reason they don't trigger my anxiety really, because I'm so focused on kind of what I'm saying. I don't have, like, my anxiety is around all sorts of other things. And like you say, just thinking, yeah, okay, this is normal to feel like this at this point. Because, and I do wonder that that's where we all need to be more honest about how we're all feeling all the time, because it is easy to be in a room full of people and assume that everyone else is feeling okay. But I think there must be very few people who don't feel some kind of social anxiety,
yeah,
because surely that's normal, isn't it? That we walk into a room full of people, and just because we're human, we are nervous about what's going to happen and what will people think of me, and oh my goodness, am I wearing the right thing and saying the right thing? And but the more that we focus on that, like you say, and the more that we try and push it away, and the less that we accept it, the worse it becomes, doesn't it? And then it becomes this thing of, I thought that was a really nice explanation. Is that so? If I know that I'm going to somewhere where I know that I will feel anxious, if I start thinking beforehand, oh my goodness, I am going to feel anxious, then the whole
mm,
thing just starts to spiral. And that idea of mindfulness being about minding the gap is a really important one as well, I think. Is that so? So I learned about that through Vipassana meditation. Actually, that was a 5 or 6 day silent retreat that I went on to this great place down in Devon called Gaia House. And that was a fantastic retreat. And they spent a lot of time explaining about how an emotion, first of all, comes as a physical reaction. So something happens and you get that surge of adrenaline. And then immediately you get something that you label as an emotion. So it would be a flash of anxiety. And then the third stage is that if you hold on to that, then you become anxious. And then the fourth stage is that because you are anxious, that colours your view of the world. So those were explained to me as the 4 stages of Vipassana or insight meditation. And I just found that so useful, that therefore mindfulness enables you to mind the gap between that physical sensation and that flash of an emotion. Oh, here's this anxiety, kind of that sudden surge, and then breathing in the gap so that you don't then adopt it as your mind state. And again, that was revolutionary for me to be able to say, just as you explained there, is that, oh, here is my anxiety. But if I breathe, it doesn't mean that I have to become anxious, because if I don't hold on to the emotion, it can drift away again. And we do feel different emotions all the time. That's something, again, that I found really useful, is to be aware of the ebb and flow of my emotions, because I can be anxious about something, but then in the same moment, I can, I don't know, see the blue sky and a squirrel running along the fence and think, oh, that's cute. And I'm immediately, my mind is like a puppy. It just goes off and thinks, oh, that's a cute squirrel. And if I notice that and think, well, and actually consciously think, well, I was anxious, like holding on to that anxiety. But if I let it go, actually there was a moment of amusement there.
Mm.
And so my anxiety had actually lifted at that point. And if I let it go, I have got the ability to now feel something different, whether it's bored or indifferent or angry or happy or whatever it is. There are all sorts of subtleties within our emotions. And noticing that I can wake up feeling one way and within a couple of minutes be feeling something else, again, really helps me to not hold on to one emotional state and to be more comfortable about, oh, right, well, in this moment I'm feeling anxious, but so what? Because, in a minute's time I'll feel something else. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does make sense. And I mean, in my younger days, I used to suffer from depression as well. And for some reason, I found that a lot easier to accept or deal with. I feel like I've made a lot of progress with my anxiety, but my depression is like almost like a friend that I kind of live with now.
Mm.
And whenever I'm having a day where it's like, well, I'm feeling kind of down today, it never sets off any alarm bells anymore. It's something that, well, do you know, I kind of have a bit of a sniffle, so that one of the reasons why is that I might be feeling under the weather, or it might be that I haven't got any exercise for a while. And if I know that I just kind of go to my routine, that me mood will rise, knowing that at some point it'll rise again in the future. Because I think a big part of my what drove my depression was not really seeing any light at the end of the tunnel, and not seeing that anything was ever going to change. Was a self-driving force in it. And now seeing that, actually, even when I'm feeling down, is that I'm quite lucky and I've got a pretty good life here and things are pretty good. And I know if I just stick with the routine that it'll take an uptick again. Really, it doesn't bother me anymore, and it definitely doesn't bother me in the same way my anxiety does. What I find with my anxiety is that I can still sometimes get sucked into that eye of the storm without even being aware that I'm in the middle of it. And it actually can be a while before I stop and realize and take a breath and realize that I can actually take a step back and observe what I'm feeling. But in that way, I feel quite lucky that I've been able to. And I suppose it kind of bodes well for the future if I've managed to do that with my depression. That at some point I'll be able to do the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and like I definitely have times where my anxiety is just, I just, whatever I do, it's really, feels impossible to kind of get on top of it. But what I've started to notice is that that's a little bit of a pattern in my life where actually I do need to change something. And as human beings, we are naturally, we like things to be the same. We're not. There are some people, obviously, that go out looking for change, but generally speaking, humans need a little bit of a push to make a change sometimes. And so I've also recently started looking at my anxiety like that. Is like, oh, hello, like, why is this? You're totally off the scale at the moment. So, and trying to listen to it a bit more. And see, and really kind of very calmly look more deeply at, well, what is that's really going on for me? And this idea of keeping a pacing diary, which is something I've been introduced to via Breathworks, where you note what goes on during your days and how you're feeling. And it's usually based around your pain and what's triggering it and what isn't and so on. But for me, that was really interesting to really notice what I was thinking about as my anxiety started to get worse, and then think, okay, so it's sort of that thought pattern where, so for me it was for me what drives my anxiety a lot of the time is not being clear about my role in life. So this COVID-19 thing has been really difficult because I was normally I work 3 days a week as a research manager for a really wonderful national charity called Brain Tumour Research, and I was furloughed a few weeks ago, and so I did that 3 days a week, and then the other days of the week I teach mindfulness and have done for years now. And especially with having something like mindfulness, I was just like, well, how do I help here? Like, what is my role in all of this? And that was really driving my anxiety, and recognizing that and thinking, okay, so I have to now find a space where I'm comfortable with not yet seeing clearly what my role in all of this is, and being able to sit with that. Then my anxiety dropped. But it wasn't until I really noticed why my anxiety was worse that I was able to then sort of accept that little bit. I don't know if I've explained that very well. It's all a bit recent, so I've never tried to explain it to anyone else before. Makes sense?
No, it does make sense, and I wanted to kind of explore that a little bit in this discussion, because there's going to be a lot of people that are listening to this who are in a similar position, who they've got a lot of uncertainty in their lives. They might be worried about their health or the economy or the people that they love. Yeah. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on, do you have any thoughts on how mindfulness can support people in dealing with that uncertainty?
Yeah, I think first of all is that there's that quite difficult thing of accepting the fact that life is uncertain and accepting a certain level of anxiety as normal is, and then for me, what it's done is that if I wait, things feel different because I can focus on them differently. So, for example, my role is speaking to my family. It's been taking my meditation classes online and seeing what a support that is for both me and the people in the meditation classes. And so my role, so in other words, I started to look for the kind of role that I could create to reduce my anxiety about the fact that I didn't have a role. And so the role doesn't have to be anything amazing. It's not as though I need to save the whole world. That's quite a tall order, isn't it? It's about feeding your anxiety. But if you're the kind of person, like I guess a lot of people listening to this are, that you're the kind of person that likes to help people and to feel useful and to have some kind of support role, noticing that even the smallest things are actually fulfilling that. So getting that different perspective on it is something that I found useful. And the other thing is, the really important thing that Thich Nhat Hanh teaches is about watering the seeds of happiness. And I just love this concept. And it's so important so our minds naturally scan the horizon for signs of danger, which feeds our anxiety. But at the moment, that is exactly what our brains need to be doing. I mean, if ever there was a time where we needed our nervous systems to be keeping us safe, now is the time. It's doing a great job that every time we go out, we're nervous about people. Where are they close enough? Have I sanitized my hands? All of that kind of stuff. That's serving a really important purpose because it genuinely is keeping us safe at the moment. But it's about allowing our nervous system to then come out of that state of high alert. So when we are safe in our homes, is to actually say, give your mind something else to think about. So I've actually got an app, which there's a free version of that you can download, which is called Appreciating Windowsills. And this is the game that I developed when I was in the Burns unit at Wythenshawe, just after my cancer treatment. So I was literally shaking with pain at that point because even morphine and stuff wasn't getting it under control, and I was so frightened about how ill I was and whether or not I'd ever recover and whether or not the cancer treatment had worked. And my anxiety was absolutely sky high, and it reminds me of what a lot of people must be feeling now, which is that the present moment is a very dangerous place. And there are a lot of fears about the future, and that brings up a lot of traumatic memories about the past as well. So what I did was, lying in my bed, I thought, okay, what can I see around me? And I could see a windowsill. I'm like, right, come on, Kate, think of 3 things that you appreciate about windowsills and that make you smile. And at first I just thought, I can't think of anything. And then it was like, okay, well, that windowsill is really narrow and I couldn't actually put anything on it. And I thought, okay, well, windowsills at home are a bit wider and I really like growing plants. So actually, yeah, I appreciate the fact that I can put a plant on one of the windowsills at home and I get a lot of pleasure from the plant. And actually thinking about it, yeah, the way the light comes in, and I'm obviously not a builder. I don't know if if you don't have a windowsill, does your window fall out? But and I get these sort of strange trains of thought. But it was triggered by, what do I appreciate about windowsills? And before I knew it, my mind was going off down this route of thinking about all the things related to windowsills that would make me smile. And a stone windowsill is different to a wooden windowsill. And oh yeah, I remember we stayed at a place once that had big window seat in it, and that's like a mega windowsill that you could sit on. And before I knew it, my mind was busy thinking about those kind of things. And when I checked back in with my pain, my perception of pain had dropped. And I wasn't shaking anymore. And not only that, but I genuinely felt happy. And I'm like, well, okay, that's weird. It's like I can distract my mind into these different patterns of thought just by appreciating things that normally I take for granted, that I haven't thought about before. Because I find that the classic way of expressing gratitude is too obvious. Like if somebody says, well, so what are you grateful for in your life? One, I'm very resistant, because to me, gratitude has that sort of edge to it of you should be grateful. And so I immediately feel as though I should be doing things. And then you sort of say, oh, I'm grateful for my friends and my family. And I am. But when I'm practicing gratitude like that, it feels a little bit worthy and as though I don't know, does that make sense? I know that a lot of people find expressing gratitude really useful. And I think it's just a personal thing for me of I prefer to think about appreciation and to do things that feel a little bit lighter for me. And maybe that's a very personal thing. So for me, that's why I called it appreciating windowsills. And it's think of 3 things that make you smile. And then, I could see the sink and the taps and the bed and the chair. And then I just started filling books with words. And that was how I got through. I did a lot of hyperbaric oxygen therapy to help myself recover. And that entails going into like a diving. It's what they use for when divers, get the oxygen in there. They get the bends, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And so you go and sit in this oxygen chamber, breathing oxygen with about 7 or 8 other people for about an hour at a time. It has amazing effects for people with MS. I accessed it through MS therapy centres. But being locked in this place for an hour at a time, and I did that 5 days a week for 6 weeks to help me recover. And sitting in there, that was what I did, was I filled these books full of words. And a lot of them were inspired. I used to take in Thich Nhat Hanh books and read them. And some of the meditations would be around, flower fresh. And so I would write in my book flower and think of 3 things that I've appreciated about a flower, and 3 things about a mountain, and 3 things about still water, and, that kind of thing. And space. What do I feel? What do I appreciate about space?
Space is the hard one.
Well, do you know what? It's interesting, isn't it, the different contexts? Because now that we're in lockdown, space means something very different to us all, doesn't it? So, and this is what I find interesting, and hopefully the whole appreciating windowsills concept kind of makes more sense to everyone now, because we're all in a situation where we've had things that we take for granted taken away from us. So imagine a few weeks ago, if people had said, what do you appreciate about toilet rolls? I think people would have thought you were mad. And now they're like, oh, yeah, toilet rolls, I can get them, because we all panic bought them. Or, well, I didn't panic buy them. It was too late. By the time I got there, they'd all gone. But, all of that kind of stuff, because we do now. We really see that, don't we? Imagine when we are able to go into a coffee shop again and meet somebody for coffee, how amazing that will feel.
Yeah.
So what do you appreciate about, a table in a coffee shop? And now probably everybody could say, well, I could hold hands over it, or I could hug my friend and we can sit down and have our hands 6 inches away from each other. And I can touch a table and a chair without sanitizing it. And, all of those things that we just didn't appreciate. And think how much more happiness now we'll get from those things that we took for granted. And that's what the appreciating windowsills game is all about.
I was just thinking that this morning. I happened to be thinking about, the next time I'm in the office and the people that I work with, and it's a civil service, so we don't really hug each other. We're very British about it.
Absolutely.
But I was just thinking that, if I saw the people I work work with an office, I would find it very hard not to hug them, just to be so happy to see them again, and
Yeah,
having that appreciation just for
yeah,
being near them.
yeah,
I think that's something that everybody would absolutely be feeling at the moment.
yeah, yeah.
Um, you talked about the app. Would you be able to talk us through, firstly, what Breathworks does, and then also your course as well?
Yep, sure. So, yeah, Breathworks, I'm only just beginning my training with them, and I was really drawn to them. They do primarily two main courses. So there's one which is Mindfulness for Health, and that's very much focused around managing chronic pain and chronic health conditions. And then they also do Mindfulness for Stress. So that was one of the things that drew me to them, because I teach in a corporate setting on a weekly basis and have taught in the same corporate for over a year now. And we're wanting to expand it more throughout the business. But because I work as a research manager, I'm really strongly driven by evidence base. And Breathworks do a fantastic job of taking baseline measurements, if that's the right word, quite like questionnaires,
Yep.
as they start the course to see how people are feeling. Take them partway through the course, they take them afterwards, 3 months after, 6 months after, so that they're actually seeing what's working. And then, tweaking the courses to make them more and more effective. And I think that's really important, that we understand about what works and what doesn't work within mindfulness. So just their professionalism, but also it's the fact they're very strongly rooted in Buddhism, which is how I came to mindfulness, and very compassion based. Really, it's such a kind, gentle way of teaching, and I think that that's really wonderful, because for me that's one of the elements of mindfulness that's so important. I'm naturally the kind of person that gives 110% to something, and although I like that side of me, because it means that I get things done, I'm very positive, I'm really committed, and all of those kind of positive things. But also, like most people, a strength can also be a weakness. And that's the side of me that can mean that I can drive myself too hard, and that I can become exhausted and burnt out and all of those kind of things. And the kindness and compassion within mindfulness has been so important to me as an individual over the years, learning to be kinder to myself. And Breathworks, it really focuses on that. And so their approach just really resonated with me. And just everyone that I've met who has done the training already and is qualified has just said, oh, it was just wonderful training, and that everybody got a lot out of it for themselves. So it's not just learning how to teach other people, which I think can be a bit patronizing, really, is all the great mindfulness teachers that I know teach from the heart, because it's really changed things for them, and not only changed things in the past, but all of us are still very much on a journey with it. I don't think you ever get to
Yeah.
the end of mindfulness,
Yeah.
So I teach from a place of, this is how it's been for me so far, and this is what I've learned about it. But one of the things that I love, so I teach on a weekly basis. One of my classes has been going about 3-4 years now, and there's always something new every week. And like today, I went to them and said, oh, I found out this great thing last week that I'd never played with before, and if you do this, does that really work for you? Because it's really working for me. And they were like, oh yeah, that's terrific. And so to be able to always be learning something new, and then always to be taking that into your teaching, I think is really important. So I'm really enjoying learning more about how Breathworks works, and I'll be qualified to deliver their courses by the end of the year, which I'm really looking forward to. Yeah. But they've also, by the way, released a couple of really terrific free online courses in response to the COVID-19 crisis. So there's one, I think it's called Mindful Self-Care for Troubled Times. And the other one is for health professionals, which is called The Quiet Place. And you can access both for free at the moment. And they are great. And they've got some really nice meditations on SoundCloud as well. So that, and then the Plum Village app is something that I use a lot as well. So
Yeah, me
yeah.
too. We'll
There's
make sure that we've got all of the links to these in the description. So if you're listening to this, you can go and access them yourself.
great, thank you. And yeah, and the other thing that I've gone back to is so on my website, which is soulnutrition.org, there's something called the happiness calendar. And that is also based on, Thich Nhat Hanh's idea of watering the seeds of happiness, is that that's more of a traditional gratitude diary kind of format where you notice 3 things that make you smile. So again, there's quite an important difference is that they're not things that you feel grateful for. They're focusing on the moments in life where you naturally smile. So, for example, like me, like the thing that I mentioned before about the squirrels running along the fence, I'm really lucky. I've got a back garden. I live in suburbia, and we've gardens back to back. So the squirrels run along all the fences and stuff, and it's quite funny when they chase each other. So I'm not, if somebody asked me what are you grateful for, I'm not sure I'd think about that. But if it's about what makes you smile, then I would mention things like that. I'd mention the fact that I see birds hopping on the grass, or, my cat does something cute, or just the blue sky and the feel of the air on my skin. When we're especially all in lockdown now, when you go out and you actually feel the air against your skin, it's those moments of pleasure, the moments that make you smile. And the happiness calendar is about just noticing 3 things each day that make you smile and that you appreciate. And you just type them into the website, it's all free. And then we use tag cloud technology. So when you go back in the next day, whatever you typed in has gone into the cloud. And then if you type those keywords in more, they show up larger in the cloud. So it shows you the things in life that you really appreciate. And you can also pick a colour from the Manchester Colour Wheel, which was developed by Professor Peter Wall at Wythenshawe Hospital as a way of helping people, particularly people for whom English wasn't their first language, to express their mood by just pointing to a colour. How do you feel today? And it's quite interesting. It sounds a bit odd until you try it. But if you don't think about it too much, you just click on a colour on the wheel and it lights up in the centre of the wheel, and you'll put in, well, maybe it's that shade of yellow, and you put it in, you think, oh no, that's a bit too bright. So you can choose one that's a little less bright or whatever, and then record that. So then when you've got the month to the view of the happiness calendar, you can see that each day you choose a slightly different colour. You appreciate different things each day. But importantly, even on the darkest of days, you do still find 3 things that just make you smile just for that, that fleeting moment. And that for me works really nicely to reduce my fear about a really difficult day, because I absolutely, even on the most difficult of days, I could find 3 things. When I was in hospital, just somebody bringing you a cup of tea, you just think, oh, thank you, and there are those moments, and somehow, I don't know, on a really bad day, it's almost as though they're highlighted. I don't know if you find that as
well. I mean, it really resonates with me just being able to go outside, because I've been recovering from COVID, and I obviously had the self-isolation period, but then was too tired to go out for a walk, and finally being able to do it and just going out and walking alongside the Mersey, and just the sunlight reflecting off the water. And the leaves on the trees, and I know exactly what you mean about having that feeling of the air moving against your skin, which you start to forget almost.
You do.
It's just, you really start to appreciate these small things. So I'll definitely have to give the happiness calendar a try.
Yeah, do. Thank you. Yeah, it's really it's really, really helping me at the moment. And I remember so clearly coming out of hospital, and as I came out of the hospital and was in the car, I just cried, because I'd been inside for such a long time, and there were too many people, and the light was too bright, and the noises were too loud, and and I remember coming home and looking at the first lamppost, which was literally about 3 meters away, and thinking, I just couldn't walk that far, and being carried inside and put on the sofa. And, over the following weeks, when I could walk as far as the first lamppost, was just like, wow, this is amazing, I couldn't imagine that. And yet a few weeks before, if somebody had said, how would you feel if you could walk to the first lamppost, I'd have looked at them as though they were crazy and be like, I don't know, I wouldn't really think about it. And like I said, I really hope that this crisis is so difficult for so many people. It really is. It's incredibly challenging. But I do really hold out hope that maybe it does help us to connect to the world in a more positive way in the long term, that we really will appreciate those small things, and that maybe this will be a positive turning point for so many of us. And I really, really hope that that is the case.
I hope so. I hope so too.
I think mindfulness can help.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got a guided meditation. Do you want to introduce it and lead us through it?
Yeah, sure. So this is a version of metta, loving kindness meditation. There are so many different versions of this. And I thought I'd pick metta today because, so for anyone that isn't familiar with it, this is the idea of wishing ourselves well. And then we wish the same traditionally you would do it to three different people. You would do it to somebody for whom you have very positive feelings, somebody who you love or are very, very fond of. You do it for somebody about whom you feel fairly neutral. So, one of the neighbours that you wave to in the mornings, that kind of thing. So you don't know enough about them to have strong feelings. But and then the third person is somebody with whom you have difficulty. And then you open it out to people in the vicinity and open it out wider and wider to people across the world. And one thing that I would say is that if you are suffering from illness and disease, I would definitely say focus just on yourself. Don't send metta out any further than that. So, and for a long time, I mean, when I was recovering from cancer, it was at least 6 to 9 months where all I did was focus on wishing myself well, using the smiling that I use, but also using metta. And may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be well, may I be free from suffering. And I did it deeper and deeper into my body. I imagined every cell of my body sending this loving kindness, wishing them well into every cell, and just went deeper and deeper into myself until I felt stronger to send it out. But when you do send it out, the way that I use it as well, to come back to this, one of the ways that I manage my anxiety is when I find myself worrying about people whom I love, which obviously I'm sure we're all doing at the moment, is when I find myself thinking, I really hope they don't get COVID-19 and, how will they be, is to flip that round to think, well, that's a very negative way of thinking about it, because actually what I do is I want to wish them well. Rather than worrying about them being unwell, I want to wish them well. So I would use metta to, when I catch myself thinking like that, worrying about other people, I would switch it around to use this idea of sending out loving kindness to the people that I care about. So there are so many different versions of this. There are some really beautiful versions by Thich Nhat Hanh, and maybe I'll use that one today. So this comes from a small book of his called How to Love. So are you happy for me to lead you through that one?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what we'll do is I'll just lead us through it, directing it to ourselves. But if people want to, then you can replay this and then maybe put in the words, may you be peaceful, may happy, and so on. So shall we enjoy a couple of sounds of the bell, and then I'll lead us through it. May I be peaceful, happy, and light in body and spirit. Peaceful, happy, and light in body and spirit. May I be safe and free from injury. Safe and free from injury. May I be free from anger, afflictions, fear, and anxiety. Free from anger, afflictions, fear, and anxiety. May I learn to look at myself with the eyes of understanding and love. Understanding and love. May I be able to recognize and touch the seeds of joy and happiness in myself. May I be able to recognize and touch the seeds of joy and happiness in myself. Joy and happiness. May I be able to identify and see the sources of anger, craving, and delusion in myself. May I be able to identify and see the sources of anger, craving, and delusion in myself. Identify and see. May I know how to nourish the seeds of joy in myself every day. May I know how to nourish the seeds of joy in myself every day. Nourishing seeds of joy. May I be able to live fresh, solid, and free. Fresh, solid, and free. May I be free of attachment and aversion, but not be indifferent. May I be free of attachment and aversion, but not be indifferent. Maybe we can go back to that first phrase. May I be peaceful, happy, light in body and spirit. And start, if we're comfortable, to push that outwards, but otherwise you remain with yourself. So may all the people who I know be peaceful, happy, and light in body and spirit. Peaceful, happy, light in body and spirit. Broadening our awareness out to everyone within our neighborhood, our city, our country. Peaceful, happy, light in body and spirit. Out further across the world, including all beings in our loving kindness, our good wishes. May everyone be peaceful, happy, light in body and spirit. May they be safe and free from injury, free from anger, afflictions, fear and anxiety. May they learn to look at themselves with the eyes of understanding and love. May they be able to recognize and touch the seeds of joy and happiness in themselves. May they be able to identify and see the sources of anger, craving, and delusion in themselves. May they know how to nourish the seeds of joy in themselves every day. May they be able to live fresh, solid, and free. May they be free of attachment and aversion, but not be indifferent. Let your attention gently roll back inwards to yourself. Reconnect with where you are, the sounds you can hear, feeling of your body supported with a bed or chair or floor. Open your eyes. Notice what you can see, and maybe something that makes you smile.
Thank you, Kitty. It's been so great to talk to you. And I just want to finish by saying, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be healthy and live a long life.
Thanks so much, Sean. That means a lot to me. It's been really lovely to speak to you. Really lovely.